how are you cultivating that word of mouth? Like, that's the dream. Word of mouth is, was, and always will be the best form of marketing. So how are you creating this? How are you cultivating it? What do you attribute that success to?
You really want to invest in the channel that's working, especially when you get into real repeatability. But you also need a set of individuals who are there to experiment and or enhance what it is that you're doing. And it's a very different type of profile and a very different set of skills.
You're faced with scaling and growing your business, and the quest for best practices in structuring your overall go-to-market approach becomes a pivotal pain point. It's like building the foundation for a skyscraper. Every decision impacts the structure's stability and potential height. Figuring out how to expand while maintaining efficiency and cohesion in your market strategy can feel like navigating uncharted waters. The struggle lies in figuring out the most effective practices to ensure that your growth is rapid and sustainable. The question is this: how do you currently navigate the challenges of scaling and growing your business, especially in structuring your go-to-market approach? Harrison Rose is the co-founder and CEO of GoodFit, specializing in go-to-market functions, revenue, and strategy. In this episode of the Run Revenue Show, Harrison discusses strategic customer targeting and the importance of timing and getting in front of the right customers, utilizing data to inform go-to-market strategies and sales processes, the challenges and importance of building outbound machinery, maintaining data quality, defining ideal customer profiles for effective sales outreach, and more. Stay tuned throughout this full episode to learn Harrison's effective strategies for running revenue.
I'm Kyle Coleman, CMO at Clary and host of the Run Revenue Show. Every Monday, I give you behind-the-scenes access to executive conversations with the best revenue pros in the world and get their tips, strategies, and real-life stories for stopping revenue leak, achieving revenue precision, and leading their teams to success. Are you ready to run revenue? Good news. Find the Run Revenue Show wherever you get your podcasts and tune in weekly for new episodes.
This is Run Revenue Show with Kyle Coleman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Run Revenue Show. I'm so excited to be joined today by Harrison Rose. Harrison has founded not one, but two different companies here in the last few years, Paddle and GoodFit. We're going to talk all about best practices for scaling, for growing, how to think about your overall go-to-market structure. So before we get into the topics at hand, I want to say hello. Harrison, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Harrison. I founded my first business, Paddle, 11 or 12 years ago now. I'm terrible at dates, so hopefully there's no pop quizzes during this podcast, but it certainly feels like a long time ago. I ran all of revenue, go-to-market and strategy there for a decade or so. I actually stepped back from full-time at Paddle January last year, having been running it my entire adult life alongside my co-founder, who's the same age as me, Christian. I took a short break and then, started another one for my sins. The latest is called GoodFit, which came about in quite a unique way based on how we're going to market and being at Paddle. I'm sure we'll cover both of those things. Yeah, that's me, and thanks for having me.
That's what I want to dig into a lot here, Harrison. That most of the listeners here are senior level revenue operations leaders or revenue leaders, generally speaking, and it's planning season. Everybody's thinking about territories, thinking about all the different ways that they're going to go to market in the next fiscal year, and we'll get into that. But let's hear a little bit more about the story of Paddle, because I think you and I both just undersold it pretty significantly just now. You went from literally starting a company to a unicorn in a number of years. Talk to us about how. Talk to us about how you thought about growth, how you thought about different areas of revenue leak and went and solved those areas so that you could continue that wild growth trajectory.
It's fun to look back. Paddle now is 300 staff, 3,000 plus customers globally, $300 million raised. It's nice to go right back to the start. And because it was zero everything, when we first started, literally nobody knew who we were. Nobody knew about our value proposition. We operate under this thing called the merchant record model. For those of you who don't know, Paddle does payments, checkout, tax, recurring billing infrastructure, all for software companies. But nobody knew who we were or what we were doing when we started. And that was fun and a challenge when we got going. I decided to go outbound to begin with at Paddle because I felt customers weren't coming to me. I probably used to go and find them. And that was pretty much our core and exclusive channel for growth, actually. For 5 years, to be honest with you, before we laid in any other channels, efforts, which we can also talk about as maybe a right and a wrong thing, maybe concurrently. But yeah, we were growing 200% year on year, outbound, exclusive. largely email. We weren't even doing a lot of cold calling. It was a slightly different time, I think, to the market today. But that's certainly how we got started. And we can start to unpack some of the things we did well there or not so well.
This is a situation that many folks find themselves in, Harrison, where before you have that real brand equity, before you have that awareness, you've got to find a way to condition the market. You've got to find a way to break through the noise to make your brand, your company known. As you were scaling this outbound machinery, any key metrics that you were looking at that were indicators, and maybe not of success metrics, like that's pretty clear. We're looking for pipeline and revenue, but maybe more upstream. What were you looking at to say we're running an efficient and effective outbound shop?
It's a really good question. I think when I was talking and thinking about this podcast, one of your themes obviously is to think about revenue leakage, right? And how can we get the best bang for our buck? And how can we ensure that we're, running the most efficient funnel or process we possibly can? And this is something we were pretty obsessed over, right? Like we had some really big, ambitious goals when we first started. Perhaps naively, but I had a very small team. I was basically a team of one, maybe two after a couple of years. And I thought, okay, what is the best possible way I can use my own time and resource in going to market with no brand equity and no inbound, as you said. And the thing that I really obsessed over and have probably thought about quite a lot since then was around how we decided who we would actually be going after in the early days and how we prioritized them. The first thing to unpack there is that Panel has a really specific type of customer that's actually able to serve. So we service software companies that have a checkout because all of Paddle's propositions surround the kind of checkout piece. That sounds really easy to describe. Go find those and go sell to them. Actually finding a list of B2B, and it became more and more B2B over time, but B2B software companies with a checkout is really hard. Like industry filters for software don't work very well. And when you're using like technographics to try and find people with a checkout, again, sometimes the behind sign-up flows, like it's a lot easier to describe than it is to execute upon. But hopefully some of the listeners can relate to this. There's a lot of people out there who only service people on a particular CRM or using a particular dev technology or whatever it may be. We basically had that problem almost times two. And what I recognized when I first started going outbound was that there was this market of software companies that didn't have a checkout that was even bigger than the one that I was able to serve. And I spent loads of my time trying to outbound to these people. And they're like, yeah, Paddle sounds great, but I do like invoicing. I don't care. And today we listen to that people can have invoicing. But I realized I was just wasting so much of my time and so much of my dollars, efforts on just people we couldn't sell to. So I got really laser focused on actually making sure whatever it was we were experimenting with, whether it was ads or an outbound campaign, was actually directed at the right customers in the first place. And sometimes I think that's a part of the process that people are neglecting a little bit today.
I totally agree, Harrison. And it's so interesting because it sounds so simple. Nevertheless, whenever you hear best practices for prospecting or you look at the trainings that are out there for sellers and for SDRs, all of it is focused on the tactics of how to write a good email or how to do a good cold call. And very little time is spent on exactly what you just said. Are we actually reaching out to the right people at the right accounts at the right time? And that foundationally is probably the most important thing. And that certainly is something that I've been really like a hammer that I have just been beating over and over again because it is the main success indicator. And so what are we looking at? You feel like you've identified the right accounts. What are maybe the leading indicators from a metric standpoint that are indicative of, okay, yes, we found the right accounts. We can double down on this strategy. What kind of metrics would you recommend people look into to assess the viability of that strategy?
I'd actually break it down into, to use your phrase, which is one that I use all the time around getting in front of the right customers and then getting in front of them at the right time. Actually, are quite distinct processes, measures. You can use different data to do these types of things. When trying to establish whether you get in front of the right customers, for me, it's all about, from a sales perspective, at least, if that's what we're talking about today, like a qualification rate, right? Like if you go and try and map your market, in Paddle's case, B2B software companies with the checkout, what percentage of those that you actually go on to work actually meet that criteria? Which percentage of them that you're running an ad at or in your outbound campaign, or as you're doing your prospecting and when you start the quarter, what percentage of them are actually the right qualified customers for you to go and sell to? So I'll be looking at looking for a baseline qualification rate and trying to get that as high as possible. If only 30% of the people that you've distributed to your reps or you're trying to work in any given quarter actually are qualified for your product, like 70% of your time for dollars, whatever it is, are just completely wasted, right? The analogy that I've given before, which I think really hits this home, is to your point where a lot of the content today and a lot of the focus is on, a lot of the feedback I sometimes get asked is like, what messaging is going to work really well? What tactics can I use to get people to reply to my email? The analogy that I use around them probably jumping ahead of themselves a little bit is around the buying house kind of analogy, whereby when you're looking to sell a house, you do need amazing photos, you do need an amazing description of the property. But the thing you need to do most is that listing gets in front of people who are in the market to buy a house, like the qualified buyers to some degree. It's the same thing for B2B software companies, albeit maybe a little bit simplified. So I've been looking at just like a qualification rate, quite frankly, on the first piece and trying to map your market with as many of those qualified customers as you can, because it also informs strategy. Like we're talking about 2024, how many customers are actually out there available for me to be able to go and sell to in order to hit my target. Like, this number is really critical to build any level of strategy or go-to-market process around. Thereafter, there's normally quite a large number of companies for most people to be able to go and sell to. There's going to be some people who are in the enterprise, 7 to 100 accounts. This is less of a problem for them. But most of us, we're talking in the thousands, sometimes low tens. If you've done a good job of mapping the market of accounts, there's 10,000, then the qualification rate there is nice and high. There's still too many of them for you to be able to go after all of them in any given quarter, especially with some of the changes that maybe could come out in recent weeks and months. The next level is around how do you prioritize those accounts to be able to going after those that have the highest propensity to buy. And how you do that, I think, would probably vary from business to business, but we can talk about some of the concepts and how I measure that a little bit separately. But does that make sense in terms of the distinction?
It makes perfect sense. And I'll layer another sort of angle onto this, Harrison, which is firmographic information, technographic information, absolutely critical. Your ICP, your ideal customer profile, is often going to be banded by that type of information. That's excellent. And if you're using that to define your territories and assign your accounts and prioritize, wonderful. We layered on something different at Clary that I think was a major unlock for us, Harrison. It had less to do with Clary and far more to do with the strategic initiatives that cohorts of companies were trying to achieve. And what do I mean by that? We sat down and we looked at our value props, and a lot of it is around forecasting and revenue precision and driving that kind of repeatability around revenue. And in 2019, 2020, the IPO market was absolutely on fire. And we looked at our customer base and we're like, holy smokes, we've got 25 companies that were private, bought Clary, and are now public. We have a really cool story to tell now. So let's find now within our ICP. This has nothing to do with intent data or who's on what website or any of that, and has more to do with this cohort of potential customers that are undergoing the same strategic initiative that we've served customers really well using. So we looked at all the high growth companies that were late stage that seemed to have the right levels of revenue, and all information is not always public, but we did our best to find it. And we limited the universe down from the tens of thousands of accounts that we could reach out to. Here's a cohort of 100 accounts that we think are primed to IPO. Let's reach out to them with this messaging that has to do with exactly how we've helped companies like them achieve IPO. And then we looked at what are the response rates, what are the click-throughs, what's the engagement level, how are we doing with this messaging to this cohort of people? And then we've tried to find additional cohorts like that to run or rerun that play over the years. And it's so much more effective than just blindly reaching out to people with me, here's why Clary is so great, and more to do with here's how we can help you, and here's how we've helped people like you.
You've gone through a process that I'd always recommend people to think about. Start by mapping that serviceable market, if you like. What needs to be true for someone to be able to actually use your products in the first place? And then within that, what's true about the set of customers that I have that are most happy, or what is the commonality of the value that they're seeing? What is the commonality of the pain? And then within that, okay, this is the profile of customer that tends to look like they're receiving the most value out of Clary, or a segment of customers who are using it a certain way that we can go after. Is an understanding the customers within that serviceable market allow you to both prioritize and segment. What's interesting is you do see different approaches there, and I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. I think most of the time I've been preaching that within the serviceable market, you tend to want to prioritize your more ideal looking customers, and that is very much a spectrum based on the commonality in those that have the highest LTV or the best sales velocity, whatever. So what's true about these people? What's their team makeup? What does their tech stack look like? Who are they hiring? What are they mentioning in open jobs, whatever? What's true about these companies that are the prime fit for Clary? And then thereafter, trying to segment and deliver consistent messaging. Like within that group, there's a bunch that are going to maybe go at IPO they want to go to sell to. There's a bunch that are maybe building a forecast for the first time they want to go and sell to. Which of those you do in which order? I think it's going to depend on your market and your company, but starting with the serviceable market, and then within that, deciding what's the segmentation, what's the messaging, and how we prioritize in these accounts is super critical. But you can only do that if you map the market in the first place. So yeah, I'm completely with you in terms of approach.
As you and I have both realized, building this outbound machinery getting this firmographic information, getting this technographic information, building and memorializing your definition of an ICP is not easy. There are a million different data sources out there. Almost all of them are incomplete or insufficient in some form or fashion. It seems like you realized this as you were building this engine at Paddle, and it seems to me, outside in, that this was a large reason that you started GoodFit. Am I close to the truth on that?
We really invested heavily in kind of software universes, calling it at the time, or at certain times. We mapped that market of software companies. We enriched them with more data than you ever need, just because we started to get nerdy about it, to be honest with you. Like, the level of insight we had into software companies was pretty compelling. And we were using this to inform product decisions and our go-to-market. As I said, whilst it started just outbound for 5 years, at some point we actually hired a marketing team, God forbid. And at first we were like, yeah, go and find us an inbound. And then every time they drove a lead to us, they're like, yeah, we already know about this customer. They're in the CRM. And we scolded them for it. And we're like, wait a second. If we even mapped contacts eventually. We're like, oh my God, we have this list of every account that we want to sell to, ordered based on fit to some degree. We even know every contact one of these companies. Why don't we just get us to both go after the same set of people? We really went on a journey with the data and how it could be applied. But it was really working for us in terms of going to market. There's all sorts of case studies and stuff we produced over the years, like when you did align sales and marketing around that common set of accounts and contacts, like using them to match audiences or whatever it may be. We saw that people who are hitting a LinkedIn ad or clicking on one were twice as likely to reply to that on email. So the data became the real crux of how we were going to market, how we're aligning our sales and marketing teams, what messaging we deliver to a client based on what we knew about them. And even product decisions, as I said, we started to size certain markets. Okay, there's this many B2B software companies with a checkout in the market at any given time. Maybe we need to think about adjacent market. It became the real crux of what we were doing. And as a result, it became very strategic within the business. We probably over-invested in it, to be fair, given our core competencies meant to be payments, checkouts, and more B2B software companies. But I think actually the investors recognized this quicker than we did. And there were various times where genuinely we were in VC pitch meetings and they were way more interested in this thing that we built and our data than they were Paddle itself. I remember physically being frustrated when Christian was mainly pitching General Catalyst back in the day. And I was on the line on Zoom and they were just so intrigued by this data product. And I was like, yeah, we're here for Paddle. And that message eventually hit. And my head of RevOps, Alex, who's got an amazing story. We hired him straight out of university. He had a hackathon about 3 weeks into his job. His job was to manually gather a lot of this data. We weren't great at it to start the Paddle before it got more and more programmatic. But he was like, yeah, all my peers are really miserable. So I just built a way to gather all of this stuff. I didn't even know he could code. And I was like, you're coming with me. Yeah, it's a great story. The investors effectively encouraged or suggested to him there might be a market if he were to productize what it is that we were doing. So he left long before me, actually, but was working in a servicey way to begin with, trying to work out how we could build products around this. And then when I stepped back and wasn't so good at having a rest with post-Paddle, he's not my best friend. And when your best friend comes and asks you, do you want to come on a journey with me running a company I help the idea for, it's very difficult to say no. So how I got here by hook or by crook, and then it'd be chilling post-Paddle, to be honest. It's been my entire adult life.
I want to double click on that sentence you said, that as all my colleagues are having just a hellish time trying to pull all this data together. RevOps people that are listening to this are nodding vigorously. What are the common challenges that you found from this data perspective for RevOps teams? And how are you solving them, or how do you recommend teams go about solving them as it relates to empowering or powering rather the fiscal year planning and territories and accounts and all the rest?
There's pain felt on two sides, right? So the RevOps people just get basically torrents of abuse, to be honest with you, from sales teams saying like, the data you're giving me is not good enough. The accounts you've distributed aren't great. Like, I'm in territory X and I have less of a chance to win than territory Y. They go through a lot. Your RevOps team are amazingly cheerful as a result of some of the things that all RevOps teams have to go through. The pain that we really thought about solving or recognized, or Alex felt to begin with, was that he was actually in the user's shoes of the data. Like, he was gathering it or trying to use it in the sales process and just thought it wasn't very good. And I guess that the problem that we're trying to solve is that today, reps typically get given to this just huge database of just like accounts and contacts that they can prospect from. And some people are doing some slightly more sophisticated kind of account distribution or books of business, which we can talk about, and they probably do. But normally they're given access to this huge database, right? And they're like, go filter wherever you want. You can only work in X region. Normally they're relatively junior in their role, maybe not, but they don't really know necessarily who they should be targeting, who they should be prioritizing, who's been sold to or who's not, because these things tend to connect well with the CRM. And even if they do, they tend to not have the actual data they need to filter down to the customers they actually want to sell to. So this becomes really problematic, and they spend hours and hours doing non-selling activities just to try and actually do their job. And they get frustrated because they're not selling, they can't find the accounts that they want, and it's a costly process, quite frankly. I did some estimates as to how much some of the team over at Chili Piper, who a friend of mine, was spending on this. The numbers were just astronomical. So we're trying to avoid that, right? Rather than having them actually have to do the research and waste all of that time. My ideal state is a rep hits a CRM, they have a set of accounts distributed to them or in an ordered queue if you're an early stage company, prioritized based on fit or propensity to buy that they can pick out from and go and sell to. If we can even pre-compute what type of messaging we think that's going to resonate with them, even better. I want to remove as many of those top of funnel decisions and time sinks and like thoughts that you have to go through mentally all the time with every single prospect to increase the velocity, increase the productivity of those reps. Because I think data can help us better automate or increase the efficiency of a lot of those top of funnel decisions and activities that happen almost at a user level, and then get the reps to be doing what they pay for, right? Which is actually selling our product, handling the objections, pitching our value propositions. And with happy users of data, like adoption is easy, RevOps aren't scolded, they have slightly different issues on the technical side, gathering this stuff. That tends to be the types of kind of user pain that I've seen or try and solve in the new business.
And that's a common pain that everybody's going to feel. It's amazing how I'm not surprised, as you mentioned earlier, that the investors were very interested in this data solution because the data powers so much of go-to-market everything. And if you misinvest or have the wrong data or anything like that, the downstream effects are very hard to correct. And so fixing all of those things upstream and allowing for that kind of go-to-market velocity, as you called it, is, I think that's the job of RevOps. And if they have the data that helps them really implement that and have confidence in that, that is a game changer for companies.
It's easy to understand. It's just, do you want to run, from a marketing perspective, maybe another example. Would you like to run ads at a set of user profiles or the buyer personas of the companies you want to sell to? Or do you run your ads more broadly than that? Why would you go more broadly than the set of people we absolutely want to sell to? It doesn't make any sense. But the more narrow you can get, hopefully the better return that you see. And then RevOps can also be freed up to not have to handle like very angry reps or whatever, and actually be doing their job as to how we could be, increasing efficiency even further or whatever they do.
Now, some marketers would say, oh, we're going to serve these ads because it's more of an awareness play and long-term, they're going to come back around and all those things. My reaction or response to that, or maybe our strategic approach at Clary, is we're going to create awareness with the free channels that we have, with what we do with this podcast and on social media and the rest. We're going to create a ton of awareness that way through our thought leadership. The paid things that we do are going to be exactly what you said, Harrison, targeted toward the accounts and the people that we have some degree of certainty are in the market for a solution like ours. As otherwise, the marketing spend gets unbelievably inefficient extremely quickly, and then finance loses faith, the exec team loses faith, and CMOs like myself are not too long for this world. I think it's really important to find that balance. And again, a lot of it comes down to the data infrastructure that you have powering it.
And I've seen some people do some really awesome stuff, right? Once you've mapped that market of qualified accounts, you've scored all of them based on fit or propensity to buy. You've used that score to decide which one the reps go after. Marketing can choose just to layer in the air cover to the same set of accounts, or because they can target more accounts concurrently. Maybe they go slightly broader than that because there's more accounts that are really high scoring that you want to target. And maybe we prioritize some that engage. That long tail, you can choose to approach it in different ways.
Now, at Paddle, you said the first 5 years, outbound driven, hand-to-hand combat, doing all those sorts of high effort plays. At GoodFit, when we were talking the other day, you said your growth is mostly word of mouth, like the complete polar opposite from the way that you grew at Paddle. How are you cultivating that word of mouth? Like, that's the dream. Word of mouth is, was, and always will be the best form of marketing. So how are you creating this? How are you cultivating it? What do you attribute that success to?
I think largely just the mistakes and all the things I did wrong at Paddle, to be fair. Like, it's just a completely different scenario. Like, at Paddle, nobody knew who we were. We had no credibility. We hadn't established ourselves as thought leaders. We had no audience, no community. None of the things that you probably require in order to deliver upon or execute successfully upon some of those kind of dark funnel kind of strategies that you're talking about. Whereas we go into GoodFit, and we already were known, certainly within Europe, at least Alex and I, as doing some quite interesting stuff with data. People would refer people to us all the time to talk about it. There was a queue of people lined up to buy GoodFit before it even started, quite frankly. And so It was just a very different scenario, quite frankly, which just allowed some of this stuff to happen. In terms of cultivating it, it's a really good question. We aren't really spending any dollars on sales or marketing. And it is all word of mouth referral. We're doing a little bit of social content as well. I drag there kicking and screaming. It's not the thing that I enjoy the most, to be candid with the listeners. We're growing at like 100% year on year, which is awesome. Often a much lower number than what we are at Paddle these days. A little bit easier. It's been working, I think, as a result of their brand and the credibility and the thought leadership we established. We weren't able to do at Paddle. And interestingly, when thinking about the mistakes that we made at Paddle, I think not investing in establishing ourselves as a thought leader around payment and tech and recurring billing, and actually building brand and building credibility actually really hurt us over the decade in which I was at the helm. I think there's a balance to strike, right? You really want to invest in the channel that's working, especially when you get into real repeatability. But you also need a set of individuals who are there to experiment and or enhance what it is that you're doing. And it's a very different type of profile and a very different set of skills. And we probably didn't recognize that or invest in that experimentation or augmentation, whatever you want to call it, versus like, this is working, throw bodies at the thing that's working, continue to do the thing that's working, iterate on it. You need some like revolution as well as iteration, like in there. And we didn't add in other channels, other spend, investment in brand until way too late, and only saw the benefits of Paddle later. Whereas at GoodFit, I think I'm making the opposite mistake. We're quite reliant on brand and word of mouth and referral. I probably need to start layering in some of the more quote unquote scientific channel into what it is that we're doing. So at least I'm learning a lot. It's a different world.
What's so interesting about it, Harrison, and again, audience here, RevOps people, revenue leaders listening, is many of the instincts of that profile or that persona for marketing is throw the money into the direct response channels that are going to immediately generate pipeline. That's what the job of marketing is to do that, create opportunities, create pipeline. But what you just said, and what I happen to also believe in, is that you're at a certain point throwing good money after bad if all you're doing is investing in lead generation and you're not actually investing in demand creation, brand awareness creation, the thought leadership type channels. So there has to be a healthy balance of both. It can't be all 100% in one camp or the other. Finding that balance is really important. And if you have the right thought leadership, if you have the right brand awareness, if you're creating the right demand, it's going to make everything else easier, not just the marketing sourced pipeline that you're creating, but also the outbound efforts that your SDRs and your sales teams are pursuing. And so it's really interesting that you have that kind of aha moment to say, investing in that type of demand creation or that brand awareness early is a good investment.
There's so much that, so many lessons learned, right? Like at Paddle, we didn't invest in that early enough. As you said, I think that probably was impacting all stages of the funnel, right? We weren't getting as much organic inbound as we probably otherwise would. Not that was a core channel for us certainly in the early days. But every stage in the funnel, that lack of brand awareness, that lack of credibility was probably hurting us. Deals were really taking longer. We probably were losing deals as a result of that. Even just conversion rates at each stage would probably be better, so on and so forth, right? And I think we recognized that too late because we struggled to attribute the gain. As much as we tried to do a lot of mad mathematics on like dollars, like what impact does a dollar have on the funnel performance of an account versus not? We got into some very scientific. Then I think on the GoodFit side, it's slightly different. Like we're in a very crowded space in like data, like GoodFit does data for go-to-market teams, basically, bought either by sales leadership or RevOps leadership typically. We're in a really crowded space and people have been really been burnt by bad data providers before. Like we all still get outbound around buying lists of like competitors, which just aren't good even today. Like we all get them. And I think even more so than we had at Paddle, which is weird given there we were having people's payments, people's revenue, like that credibility or that social referenceability is so critical. I think a lot of the revenue leaders that we're selling to a GoodFit now basically buy what their peers are buying. Really leaning into that's really important because, again, you jumpstart a lot of the concerns around credibility or whatever. So dark funnel is always performing really well in terms of speed, conversion rates, etc. But scaling is a little bit hard when you don't know the exact inputs in order to drive it forward. So then you start to have some really interesting conversations around going into 2024, guys. To what extent do we resource the start funnel, which is linearly growing with us? We don't know exactly how or when. And like the main issue is like time versus actually experimenting with some more of your traditional quote unquote repeatable channels, right? This is where we're at today.
Any other lessons learned from the Paddle days that have really struck with you that you'd like to share with the audience here? Again, insane growth from 2 people in a garage to a unicorn status in a handful of years. Bumps along the way, I'm sure. Anything really stick out for you that we haven't already talked about?
It's always fun to talk about mistakes. I was chatting to one of my VC friends about this the other day, and I was just like, people ask all the time, and I was like, if there were actually genuine moments like that genuinely hinged the success or failure of the company, they would have been terrifying. And actually, we just probably made a series and a ton of mistakes along the way, as opposed to be like, that one we definitely got right, that one we definitely got wrong. Like, it's quite a scary way to run the business. I was thinking about I think not investing in that brand was something that we should have done a lot earlier, as I said, especially as we moved into new markets. Like, since making the acquisition of things like Profit, which for Paddle, which has a significant brand in the US, you see all metrics improving off the back of that, whether that's organic inbound or conversion rates, whatever it may be. And that was definitely something that we did wrong and should have done earlier. And as I said, I think people struggle, even in a product level, not only a go-to-market level. I see this too. It's like, when do you just only and exclusively invest in the thing that you know that works versus dedicate some dollars and some time to experimenting with additional things? Like, even from a product perspective, and maybe people see this in RevOps or their tech stack or technical debt too, is you can invest in the core product because that's your like money maker, and you have a bunch of other ideas that you think are going to be really successful outside of this. Balancing the resourcing of the two is really hard. I think we probably got that balance wrong on the go-to-market side for quite a while. So as you go into your 2024 budgeting, like creating room for new channels and new experiments will probably be a takeaway or something that I consider beyond just like, what are the heads I need to execute upon the strategy that's predefined that I know about. Because you don't want to get to the end of next year and be like, oh God, I feel like we've actually exhausted this to some degree, or we've hit a ceiling, and you need to layer in 4 other channels that you have no idea what they're going to be. Committing to a plan in 2025 that you don't believe in would be a bad place to be. So trying to strike that balance is something that I think we could probably have done better.
I love that. It's great advice, Harrison. It's hard to do too, because often those new channels or those new experiments cost more than the return you get in the early days, which is to say you have to disproportionately invest to make those channels come to life. And a lot of times that's a really tough pill to swallow because it looks inefficient on the surface, but you're placing a bet for growth and you're trying to find where you can get future leverage. And so figuring out where those channels are is fundamental to continue and sustained growth.
Yeah, and it's probably a late stage problem, to be fair, right? I think if I was giving advice to an earlier stage company, it's focus on one thing, find one thing that works, invest in it to the point that you have enough capital and resources to experiment. There's a time and a place for that, really. And I'm thinking about some advice maybe for some earlier stage folks listening, if there are indeed any. I think the other thing that I did wrong, reflecting on it in the moment here, is it probably took me too long actually to get close enough to our business fundamentals, which is where I think RevOps folks listening could also help. Like when we actually got really good at building out our commercial plan for the year, and I was able to isolate every single variable that went into my planning, ACV, sales cycle, conversation to opportunity rate, speed from conversation to opportunity, speed at every stage in the funnel, whatever it may be. There's a ton of variables. Just break down sales velocity, at least, all the different variables that go into that calculation. When you're able to scenario plan the impact of changing your ACV from A to B, or sales cycle from X to Y. And then when you start to do that by segment, you can get really sophisticated around your planning, but also you can just see what's the most high impact activity. And we've done this getting into 2024 planning for GoodFit. We basically realized that ACV is great. Like improving ACV is going to help us as we grow. It's actually much, much more important for us adding X new logos on top of our baseline right now. And that's actually what we should be focusing on. Really understanding your points of leverage and doing a ROI analysis or ROI score on reach, impact, effort, whatever. Of those things I probably could have done earlier, because again, we were growing really efficiently, that like being closer to those points of leverage and understanding the impact that they could have should you turn them was really, really critical. And then as you scale, that continues and you start to give owners to changing numbers A to B, depending on how you're all structured. I think that probably came a bit late, having never run a business before or built out some of these plans before, but we got there at the end.
There you go. There you go. Love it. I have a bonus question that we did not prep you for. Always exciting here. I'm curious, Harrison, to hear a book or a podcast or some source of knowledge that you really love that you would recommend to other revenue leaders or revenue operations leaders, and why?
I love some of the really boring stuff. Like some of the things that I'm seeing people do not sell right now are just discovery calls. Like I think the discovery call at GoodFit is like the best part of the buying experience, and we win deals based on how much fun and how much we establish ourselves as good at this stuff in the discovery call. It's so collaborative. People have a great time, and people are just not doing this very well right now. I was quite inspired by Spin Selling, which is old, really scientific, tough read. If you're really struggling to quantify pain or even understand what pain is within organizations, I would recommend that book 100 times. It's called Spin Selling. And then as you grow as a leader, there's probably some different ones. But for the revenue leaders out there, going back to basics and checking that one out was pretty formative for me in the early days. A new one I haven't read, but keep hearing about, and it's shame on me for not having read it, as the Jolt Effect. I haven't actually had the chance to read that yet, shamefully. And I was scolded on the panel for that the other day, but hearing good things about that one too.
Highly recommend it. Matt Dixon was actually on the Run Revenue podcast a few quarters ago. So you can get a primer for the Jolt Effect. And once you listen to Matt talk about it for 45 minutes, you will instantly buy it and you'll read it over the weekend. It's a quick read. But nevertheless, Harrison, thank you so much. Harrison Rose, co-founder of Paddle, co-founder and CEO of GoodFit. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
That is a wrap for this episode of the Run Revenue Show. We will catch you next week. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends and family, and we'll catch you next week.
Don't let what you heard today go to waste. Take 2 minutes to download today's checklist to get your priorities in line for the week. You can find that linked in our show notes. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. We'll be back next Monday with more to help you win your week.